Late summer, 52 BC. The Roman army wasn't fighting, it was digging. For days, tens of thousands of legionaries carved trenches into the hills surrounding a Gallic fortress called Alesia. The rhythmic strike of iron against earth replaced the clash of swords. Timber disappeared into massive earthworks. Watchtowers rose above the countryside, one beam at a time. To anyone watching from the walls, none of it made sense. Rome had cornered its enemy. Why wasn't Caesar attacking? Inside Alesia, nearly 80,000 Gauls waited behind strong defenses. They had expected ladders, siege towers, and battering rams. Instead, the Romans were building something else. Then, just after sunrise, a horn sounded from the western ridges. Roman sentries climbed the nearest towers. At first they saw only dust, then flashes of sunlight, then thousands of spearheads. The relief army had arrived. In a single morning, everything changed. The Romans were no longer the hunters. They were standing between two armies, one trapped behind the walls, one marching toward them. Every experienced commander understood what this meant: attack immediately, or retreat before it was too late. Julius Caesar chose neither. He gave an order that stunned even some of his own officers: keep digging, not toward Alesia, away from it. He was about to build one of the most extraordinary battlefield systems in military history, and more importantly, he was about to solve a problem that almost everyone else had misunderstood. Forget everything you know about Julius Caesar. Forget that Rome eventually wins. Imagine you are standing exactly where he stood. Behind you, 50,000 exhausted legionaries. Ahead, one enemy army inside a fortress. Somewhere beyond the horizon, another army is coming. You don't know when it will arrive. You don't know how large it will be. You don't even know where it will attack. What would you do? Would you storm the fortress before reinforcements appear? Would you retreat while escape is still possible? Or would you stay and hope your soldiers survive being trapped between two armies? Those are the choices almost every commander would consider. Caesar saw a fourth option. History remembers the walls he built. Military strategists remember the problem he solved. Alesia wasn't the beginning of Caesar's campaign. It was the moment everything he had built over 8 years was placed at risk. Since arriving in Gaul, Caesar had transformed the Roman army into one of the most experienced fighting forces on earth. His legions crossed rivers that enemies believed were impossible to cross. They built bridges in days instead of months. They marched farther than rival armies thought possible. Again and again, Caesar forced his opponents to fight battles they never wanted. Each victory expanded Roman influence. Each victory also made Caesar more dangerous politically. Back in Rome, his allies celebrated every success. His enemies counted every casualty. They understood something important. If Caesar returned undefeated, he would possess wealth, prestige, and an army personally loyal to him. That combination terrified many senators more than any foreign enemy. Failure in Gaul would destroy Caesar's ambitions. Victory could change Roman history forever. So when he looked toward Alesia, he wasn't simply fighting for another province. He was fighting for his future. For years, Rome benefited from one enormous advantage. The Gallic tribes rarely fought together. Different leaders protected different interests. Old rivalries divided them. Caesar exploited those divisions brilliantly. Then one man appeared, Vercingetorix, young, charismatic, ambitious. But unlike many leaders before him, he understood Rome. He realized defeating Roman soldiers wasn't enough. He needed to defeat Roman logistics, Roman discipline, Roman patience. Instead of defending every settlement, he ordered many destroyed. Instead of protecting food supplies, he burned them. Villages disappeared in smoke before Roman foragers arrived. Fields became ash. Wells were poisoned. Anything that might help Caesar survive was removed. It was ruthless. It was devastating, And for the first time in years, Caesar found himself reacting instead of controlling the campaign. That alone made Vercingetorix one of the most dangerous opponents he had ever faced. Eventually, Vercingetorix withdrew into the fortified hilltop settlement of Alesia. Many Roman officers believed they had won. Their enemy had locked himself inside a fortress. All they needed to do was finish the siege. Caesar wasn't convinced. He climbed the surrounding hills himself, not to admire the fortress, to understand it. He studied the valleys, the rivers, the ridgelines, the approaches, the distances. While others looked at walls, Caesar looked at terrain, because terrain determines possibilities. The fortress occupied exceptionally strong ground. Steep slopes protected much of its perimeter. Nearby rivers complicated movement. Any direct assault would cost thousands of lives. But that wasn't what concerned Caesar most. He wasn't studying where Vercingetorix was. He was thinking about where he wasn't. If you are the leader of all Gaul, why choose a fortress unless someone is coming to relieve you? That question changed everything. Caesar realized something before anyone could prove it. Alesia wasn't the final battlefield. It was bait. That evening, Caesar gathered his senior officers. Imagine the discussion. One commander recommends an immediate assault. Another argues for withdrawal. A third suggests tightening the siege and waiting. All reasonable ideas, all dangerous. Because every proposal treats Alesia as the problem, Caesar didn't. He saw something different. The fortress wasn't the problem. The relief army was. And if that relief army arrived while Rome was attacking the walls, the campaign could end in disaster. Suddenly, every obvious solution became the wrong solution. Storm the city? Too costly. Retreat? Too risky. Wait passively? Too uncertain. There had to be another answer, one that would allow Caesar to fight on his own terms, even after the relief army arrived. Within hours, Roman surveyors began marking lines across the countryside, not where the next battle would happen, but where Caesar intended to force it to happen. The next morning, Caesar gave the order, not to attack, not to prepare ladders, not to assemble siege engines. He ordered his army to build. At first, even some of his own officers struggled to understand the scale of what he intended. This wasn't another marching camp. It wasn't a temporary fortification. Caesar intended to redesign the battlefield itself. Every hill, every valley, every approach to Alesia. Everything the enemy believed they understood would soon be working against them. Thousands of legionaries spread across the countryside. Surveyors marked precise lines with ropes and measuring poles. Engineers chose the strongest ground. Carpenters disappeared into nearby forests. Blacksmiths worked almost without rest, repairing tools as quickly as they broke. From sunrise until darkness, the Roman army became something more than soldiers. They became builders. To the warriors watching from Alesia's walls, it looked strange. Rome had finally cornered its greatest enemy. Yet instead of attacking, they were digging. Some laughed. Others assumed Caesar had become cautious. Vercingetorix wasn't so sure. He had spent enough time fighting Romans to recognize a dangerous pattern. Whenever Caesar appeared to be wasting time, he usually wasn't. The first trench was dug several meters deep. Then another. The excavated earth wasn't thrown away. It became the foundation for a massive embankment. Heavy timber reinforced the structure. Wooden palisades crowned its summit. At regular intervals, tall watchtowers overlooked the surrounding countryside. But these walls were only the beginning. Caesar wanted every step an attacker took to become slower, more exhausting, and more dangerous than the last. So his engineers kept building. In front of the walls, they concealed rows of sharpened stakes beneath loose branches and freshly disturbed soil. Some pits were deep enough to trap a charging warrior. Others hid angled wooden spikes designed to cripple horses before they ever reached the Roman line. Ancient writers gave these traps memorable names. The soldiers who built them needed no names at all. They simply understood their purpose: not to kill everyone, to steal momentum. A charging army is strongest when it keeps moving. Force it to slow, and discipline begins to replace panic. Force it to stop, and the defender suddenly controls the battle. Caesar wasn't building obstacles. He was building decisions the enemy would be forced to make under pressure. Every evening the work continued. Roman soldiers who had marched hundreds of kilometers and fought dozens of battles spent their nights carrying timber instead of sleeping. To modernize, it seems almost impossible, but this was one of Rome's greatest advantages. A legion wasn't simply an army. It was an engineering organization that happened to fight wars. Every legionary learned to dig, to measure, to construct, to fortify. Because Roman commanders understood something timeless. Battles are won long before the first sword is drawn. Preparation determines possibilities. Inside Alesia, confidence slowly gave way to concern. The Roman line kept growing. Every sunrise revealed another section completed. Every sunset hid another day's progress behind fresh earthworks. The defenders began to understand what they were seeing. Caesar wasn't preparing for an assault. He was preparing for time itself. Food inside the fortress was already becoming scarce. Every day the siege continued weakened the defenders. Every day strengthened Rome. Time was no longer neutral. Time had become Caesar's ally. Now imagine standing beside him again. You're looking across the completed line of fortifications. Your engineers report steady progress. Your officers congratulate themselves. The fortress is sealed. The enemy cannot escape. It feels like victory. But then a scout rides into camp. He reports unusual movement among distant Gallic tribes. Messengers crossing valleys, warriors gathering, smoke from new campfires beyond the horizon. No one knows exactly how many. No one knows exactly when. Only one thing is certain. The relief army is coming. What do you do now? Most commanders would speed up the assault. Others would abandon the siege entirely. Caesar chose something neither side expected. He ordered construction to continue, this time facing outward. For a moment, imagine hearing that order for the first time. You have already surrounded the fortress. Now your commander wants to surround your own army. No escape route. No open rear, nothing. It sounds reckless. It sounds almost suicidal. But only if you misunderstand the problem. Most commanders believed Caesar was trying to defend himself. He wasn't. He was trying to separate his enemies. As long as the army inside Alesia and the relief army remained divided, Rome would never have to fight both at full strength. That was the real objective, not the walls, not the trenches, not the towers. The objective was control. Control over where the enemy could move. Control over when they could attack. Control over how much of their enormous army could actually fight. The second wall wasn't built because Caesar feared being trapped. It was built because he intended to decide exactly how the battle would unfold. From that moment onward, the battlefield no longer belonged to the Gauls. It belonged to Caesar. The relief army arrived sooner than many Romans had hoped. From the watchtowers, sentries counted campfires spreading across the surrounding hills. By sunset, they stretched farther than anyone could easily estimate. Ancient sources disagree on the exact size of the relief force. Some claim well over 200,000 warriors. Modern historians believe the number was considerably smaller. The exact figure matters less than one undeniable fact. Caesar was now heavily outnumbered, and every man in his camp knew it. Inside Alesia, the mood changed overnight. For weeks, the defenders had watched Roman earthworks creep closer, one trench at a time. Now they watched something entirely different. Their rescuers had arrived. War horns echoed from the hills. Signals flashed between the fortress and the distant camps. For the first time since the siege began, Hope belonged to the Gauls. For Caesar, the waiting was over. Everything he had built during the previous weeks would now be tested. Not his courage, not his experience, his design. If the battlefield behaved the way he expected, Rome could survive. If it didn't, 8 years of campaigning could disappear in a single day. Imagine you're standing beside Caesar as the first reports arrive. The relief army is deploying. Your officers ask for orders. Do you attack before they're fully organized? Do you remain behind the fortifications? Do you abandon the siege while escape is still possible? Each option sounds reasonable. Each carries enormous risk. Caesar refuses to rush. He knows something every experienced commander eventually learns. The first move isn't always the most important. Sometimes, the most important decision is forcing your opponent to make the first mistake. So Caesar waits. The Gallic commanders believed they understood the situation. They saw Roman soldiers trapped between two armies. From their perspective, the outcome seemed inevitable. All they needed was one coordinated assault. Pressure from outside, pressure from inside, break the Roman line. Join forces, destroy Caesar. Simple, at least, it looked simple. What they couldn't see was that Caesar had quietly changed the mathematics of the battlefield. Numbers only matter when they can be used. 100,000 warriors cannot fight in the same place at the same time. The valleys narrowed their advance. The trenches slowed them. The obstacles broke their formations. The towers provided overlapping fields of fire. Every feature of the Roman defenses reduced the number of attackers who could reach the walls together. The Gauls possessed overwhelming strength. Caesar intended to make them fight in small pieces, one after another, instead of all at once. The first attacks began cautiously. Groups of warriors advanced to probe the Roman defenses, not to break them, to understand them. They searched for unfinished sections, weak ground, poor visibility, anything they could exploit later. Roman archers answered from the towers. Sling stones struck advancing formations. Whenever attackers approached the trenches, their momentum disappeared. Some stumbled into concealed pits. Others slowed just enough for the defenders above to concentrate their fire. Again and again, the attacks lost their rhythm before they ever reached the walls, exactly as Caesar intended. Inside the fortress, conditions grew steadily worse. Food had become desperately scarce. Every remaining supply was rationed. Every passing day increased the pressure on Vercingetorix. He understood that the relief army could not afford a long siege. They had to succeed quickly. Every failed attack favored Rome. Time, the one resource neither commander could replace, was becoming Caesar's greatest ally. Then the Gallic commanders made an important discovery. Not every section of the Roman defenses was equally strong. One stretch of higher ground prevented Caesar from constructing fortifications exactly as he wanted. The terrain was uneven. The slopes were difficult. The defensive works there were less formidable than elsewhere. It wasn't a careless mistake. It was the best solution Roman engineers could build under difficult conditions. But to the Gallic commanders, it looked like opportunity. They immediately changed their plan. No more scattered attacks. No more probing. Everything would be concentrated against that single weak sector. Enough warriors, enough pressure, enough determination. Eventually, even Roman discipline would break. It was the best chance they had, and for the first time since construction began, Caesar's strategy faced a genuine threat. Imagine receiving that report. One section of your defenses may not hold. You still have reserves. But if you commit them too early, another assault may begin somewhere else. If you wait too long, the line could collapse before help arrives. This is what command really looks like. Not choosing between right and wrong. Choosing between uncertainty and even greater uncertainty. History often makes great decisions look obvious. Standing beside Caesar that day, they were anything but obvious. As darkness settled across the hills, Neither side truly rested. Roman engineers repaired damaged earthworks by torchlight. Centurions inspected every section of the line. Fresh arrows were distributed. Water was carried forward. Wounded soldiers were quietly moved to the rear. Across the valley, thousands of Gallic warriors prepared for what they believed would be the decisive assault. Tomorrow, everything would be committed, and somewhere within those torchlit defenses, Caesar waited. Not for the battle, for the moment. His battlefield would finally prove whether he had understood the problem better than his enemy. Before dawn, the valley fell silent. For a few brief moments, neither side moved. Then the horns sounded. From outside the Roman lines, the relief army advanced. Almost simultaneously, the defenders inside Alesia launched their own assault. This was the moment Caesar had been preparing for since the first trench was dug. 2 armies. One target, the Roman line. The attack began with overwhelming force. Warriors rushed toward the outer fortifications carrying ladders, shields, and bundles of timber to fill the trenches. Archers filled the air with arrows. Sling stones crashed against Roman towers. Behind them came wave after wave of infantry. Inside Alesia, Vercingetorix ordered his warriors forward as well. For the first time, the Romans were fighting in 2 directions at once. Exactly the situation every commander tries to avoid. Yet something unexpected happened. The Gallic attacks slowed, not because they lacked courage, because the battlefield refused to cooperate. The trenches forced attackers into narrow approaches. Hidden stakes broke their momentum. The towers created overlapping fields of fire. Every obstacle delayed the next. Every delay bought another few seconds. Every few seconds allowed Roman reserves to move exactly where they were needed. Caesar had never expected his walls to be impossible to cross. He had only expected them to make crossing take longer than the enemy could afford. That calculation was beginning to prove correct. But then the reports changed. Messengers arrived one after another. The weak sector, the one built across the difficult hillside. It was under enormous pressure. Thousands of Gallic warriors had concentrated their assault there. Roman defenders were being pushed back. The line still held. But only just. For the first time during the entire siege, failure became a real possibility. Imagine standing beside Caesar now. Dust fills the air. Signals arrive from every direction. One officer demands immediate reinforcements. Another warns of attacks elsewhere. You still have reserves. But only one significant reserve remains. If you send it now, you'll have nothing left. If you wait, the line may collapse. History often celebrates bold decisions. Much more rarely does it celebrate disciplined restraint. Caesar didn't panic. He watched. He waited. Not for the moment of greatest danger, but for the moment his decision would have the greatest effect. That difference changed the battle. When the time came, Caesar mounted his horse. Ancient accounts describe him riding toward the threatened sector, wearing his distinctive commander's cloak. His arrival alone didn't win the battle. His system did. But leadership matters. Exhausted soldiers who had been fighting for hours suddenly saw their commander beside them. Fresh reserves advanced. Centurions reorganized broken formations. Engineers repaired damaged sections even while missiles continued falling around them. Preparation met leadership. Leadership strengthened preparation. Together, they held. Then came Caesar's final move. For hours he had resisted committing every available force. Now he released the cavalry. Not in a desperate charge, in a carefully timed strike. Roman horsemen swept around the battlefield and struck the Gallic relief army where it was least prepared. The effect spread almost instantly. Not because thousands were killed, because confidence disappeared. Units that had been advancing suddenly realized enemies were appearing behind them. Orders became confused, momentum vanished, and once a large attacking force loses momentum, its greatest strength often becomes its greatest weakness. Confusion spread faster than fear. Soon, the retreat began. first in isolated groups, then entire formations. Finally, the relief army broke. From the walls of Alesia, Vercingetorix watched the impossible unfold. The army sent to save him was leaving. He understood immediately what that meant. The food was gone. The relief force had failed. No second rescue was coming. The siege was over. The following day, he surrendered. Ancient writers differ on exactly how the surrender unfolded. Some describe Vercingetorix riding out in full armor before laying his weapons at Caesar's feet. Others tell the story more simply, but all agree on the outcome. Organized resistance in Gaul was effectively broken. Rome had won. His challenge was never the fortress. It was preventing two armies from becoming one. Everything else, the trenches, the towers, the hidden traps, the second wall, served that single strategic objective. The battlefield itself became his greatest weapon, long before the decisive assault began. Caesar had already determined the conditions under which it would be fought. The earthworks around Alesia have long since disappeared. The timber towers have vanished. The trenches have filled with soil. Time erased almost every physical trace of Caesar's masterpiece. But the idea survived. Great commanders do not wait for the perfect battlefield. They build one. They understand that victory rarely belongs to the army with the greatest strength. More often, it belongs to the commander who understands the problem more clearly than everyone else. That is why Alesia is still studied today, not because Rome built two walls, but because one commander realized that controlling the battlefield begins long before the battle itself. And once you control the battlefield, you often control the outcome.